Hey everyone, welcome back to our channel. Here we learn new ideas and improve our English at the same time through stories. You practice English without feeling like you're studying. Just a quick reminder, listening is great, but repeating out loud is where the real improvement comes from. So feel free to pause, take your time, and say each sentence after me. Everything here is kept short and clear so it's easier to shadow along. Don't stress about being perfect. Progress comes from repetition, not perfection. So let us start. I want to be honest about something. Before I went to Brazil, I thought I knew what it would be like. Beaches, color, carnival energy, football everywhere, people dancing in the streets. That image was sitting in my head before I even booked the ticket. Some of it turned out to be true. But Brazil, as I discovered fairly quickly, is much larger and much more complicated and much more surprising than any image a person carries in their head from the outside. The plane landed in Sao Paulo at night, and the first thing I saw through the window was the city stretching out in every direction as far as I could see, and then further, and then still further. Sao Paulo is one of the largest cities in the world, home to more than 20 million people, and from above, at night, it looks less like a city and more like a civilization. Lights going on and on toward every horizon with no visible end. I pressed my face against the window like a child and just stared. I had been to big cities before. This was a different category of big entirely. The taxi from the airport took 45 minutes to reach my hostel, and we were on highways the entire time. Not one highway, but several, stacked and layered, roads running above other roads, the city building itself upward because there was simply no more room to go outward. My driver spoke no English, and I spoke no Portuguese, which is the language of Brazil. So we sat in comfortable silence, while the city rolled past the windows in an endless stream of light and movement, and overhead bridges and buildings that seemed to have no tops because they disappeared into the dark above the promise. Streetlights. I arrived at my hostel feeling slightly stunned, which I think is the correct response to São Paulo at night. The next morning I walked out into the city, and it hit me all over again, this time in daylight and from ground level. Sao Paulo is not what most people picture when they imagine Brazil. There are no beaches here, no mountains rising from the sea, no carnival floats. It is a working city, serious and fast and enormous, full of people who are clearly going somewhere important and moving quickly to get there. But it has something I was not expecting at all, which is street art on a scale I had never seen anywhere. Entire buildings covered from bottom to top in murals, massive and detailed and painted with such skill and color that you stop walking and just stand there on the pavement looking up. I stopped 4 times in one block. The people flowing around me on the footpath clearly thought nothing of it because they had grown up with it. I could not stop staring. I found a small cafe down a side street and ordered coffee, pointing at the cup on the counter because my Portuguese extended to exactly 3 words and none of them were coffee. What arrived was small and strong, and sweet in a way that was different from Italian espresso or French cafe, something with its own character entirely. And beside it, without me asking, the woman placed 2 small round bread rolls, warm from the oven, slightly golden on the outside. These were pão de queijo, which are traditional Brazilian cheese breads made from a type of starch that gives them a soft, chewy, almost stretchy texture inside. I bit into one and stopped thinking about other things for a moment. I ate both of them and then ordered 2 more, and the woman smiled in a way that suggested she had seen this reaction before many times from people trying them for the first time. That morning, I tried to find a famous viewpoint in the city where you can look out over the skyline from above. Simple enough plan. I asked 3 different people for directions, all of whom answered with complete confidence and enthusiasm, and all 3 pointed in different directions. I picked one, walked for 15 minutes, picked another, walked for 10 more, and eventually arrived somewhere that was definitely not a viewpoint, but turned out to be a neighborhood street market that took up 4 full blocks. Tents and stalls and vendors and smells and noise and color in every direction. Fruit I had never seen before in shapes and colors that didn't match anything in my memory. A man was cutting open something large and orange and selling slices of it from a folding table. I bought one, had no idea what it was, ate it standing there on the street. It was sweet and slightly floral and completely delicious. I never found out what it was called. I still think about it. I took an overnight bus from Sao Paulo to Rio de Janeiro on my 3rd evening instead of flying, partly because it was cheaper and partly because several people told me the landscape between the 2 cities was worth seeing. The bus was comfortable in a way I had not expected, with wide reclining seats and air conditioning and a small blanket provided without asking. I fell asleep somewhere in the dark interior of the country and woke up several hours later to pale early morning light coming through the window. Outside, there were mountains, green and dramatic, and then, between them, a first glimpse of the sea, and then more mountains, and then suddenly, the city of Rio de Janeiro began to appear through the window like something you would see in a film and assume was not a real place. The famous bay, the shapes of the peaks, the white buildings climbing the hillsides. I sat up straight and stayed awake for the rest of the journey. Copacabana is the most famous beach in Rio de Janeiro, and possibly one of the most famous beaches in the entire world. A long, wide curve of white sand running along the edge of the city with the Atlantic Ocean on one side and a continuous line of buildings on the other. I had imagined it as a beautiful, perhaps slightly peaceful place. I was wrong about the peaceful part. Copacabana Beach is a full city that happens to be located on sand. Vendors walking the length of it, selling cold drinks, grilled corn, hats, sunglasses, and things I could not immediately identify. Football games happening at one end, volleyball nets at the other. Families with children, older couples, groups of friends, solo people reading under umbrellas. Music coming from somewhere always, though I could rarely find exactly where. I found a spot, sat down, and a vendor appeared beside me almost immediately, holding up a green coconut with a straw already inserted. I gave him a few coins, took the coconut, drank cold coconut water in the heat, and sat watching the whole enormous living scene in front of me. One of the most alive places I have ever sat and done nothing in particular. On day 5, I took the small red train up through the forest to see Cristo Redentor, which is the giant statue of Jesus Christ that stands on the peak of a mountain above Rio with both arms spread wide, looking out over the whole city. It is one of the most recognized images in the world, and I had been looking forward to seeing it since before the trip began. The train ride up through thick green forest is beautiful, the air getting cooler as the altitude increases, and I arrived at the top feeling good about the whole plan. The statue was completely invisible inside a thick cloud of fog. I could see approximately 4 meters in front of me, and then nothing but white. Around me stood about 50 other tourists, all wearing the same expression of quiet disappointment, mixed with determination to find this funny rather than frustrating. I stood there in the mist and waited, because it seemed like the only reasonable thing to do. Some people gave up and went back down after a few minutes. I stayed. And then, after about 30 minutes of standing in cool gray fog, something shifted. The cloud moved. Not fully and not for long, but for perhaps 90 seconds. It thinned and parted, and below me, suddenly and completely, the entire city of Rio appeared. The bay with its islands, the long curve of Copacabana, the mountains rising from the water, the buildings crowding the valleys, the ocean stretching out to the horizon beyond all of it. 90 seconds of the whole thing laid out below like something impossible, and then the cloud closed again, and it was gone. The people around me made sounds. Someone actually clapped. I stood very still, because I didn't want to do anything that might interrupt the feeling of what I had just seen. Those 90 seconds were worth every minute of the wait. That evening, something happened that became the part of the trip I have thought about most since coming home. A young man I had spoken to briefly at my hostel, a local from Rio who worked in music and had the easy, relaxed energy of someone entirely comfortable in his own city, mentioned that some friends were gathering in his neighborhood that night. Not a club, not a bar, not anything organized for tourists. Just people, in an alley between houses, with food and music and no particular agenda. He said I was welcome if I wanted to come. I said yes, immediately. We took a bus across the city and walked into a neighborhood of narrow streets and close houses, where the buildings were painted different colors, and washing hung between windows, and children were still outside playing, even though it was getting late. In an alley about 3 meters wide, someone had strung lights between the walls above head height. A speaker was playing music from somewhere inside one of the houses. A man was grilling meat on a small grill set up on the pavement, the smoke going straight up into the warm night air. People were standing and sitting on chairs brought from inside, talking loudly, laughing, passing food around. Someone handed me a plate without asking whether I wanted one. I stood there for the first 10 minutes, feeling slightly uncertain, the way you feel when you are the only outsider in a room that has known itself for a long time. And then someone asked me something in Portuguese, and I shook my head and said I didn't understand, and they laughed and switched to simple English and asked where I was from. And after that it was fine, more than fine. The kind of evening that is warm in every sense of the word, where you eat food you didn't ask for and listen to music you don't know and talk to people you will probably never see again and feel, despite all of that, completely at home. I woke up early on my last morning before the others in the hostel were moving. I walked to the beach alone while the city was still quiet, which is a phrase that applies to Rio only in the very early morning and even then only loosely. The sand was almost empty. The sky was that color it gets just before the sun arrives, dark blue at the top, shading down to something lighter near the horizon. I sat down close to the water and waited. The waves came in steadily, the same rhythm they had kept all night while the city was asleep. The sun came up over the water slowly, and the whole beach turned gold, and I sat in it and did nothing except be there, which was exactly the right thing to do. Brazil was not what I had pictured before I arrived. It was bigger and louder and more complicated and more human than the image I had brought with me on the plane. The warmth of the people was not a cliché or a travel brochure phrase. It was a man grilling meat in an alley and someone handing you a plate before you asked. It was a woman in a cafe placing bread beside her coffee, because obviously you should have bread with your coffee. It was a stranger walking with you for 10 minutes in the wrong direction because he wanted to make sure you found what you were looking for. Brazil operates on a frequency that is difficult to describe in words, but very easy to feel when you are standing inside it. And sitting on that beach on the last morning, Watching the light change over the Atlantic, I felt it completely. I picked up a handful of sand and let it go through my fingers, which is a thing people do in films and which I have always found slightly theatrical. But there on that beach at that hour, it felt like the right gesture. A way of saying thank you to a place before you leave it. I had a flight to catch. I left the beach and went to pack my bag, and I was already thinking about when I could come back. All right. If you made it through this shadowing session today, that already says something about your discipline. This repetition and consistency combination might look boring on paper, but it is one of the most powerful ways to build fluent, natural English. Keep showing up like this, and your brain will slowly adapt. Trust the process. If this helped even a little, consider liking the video or subscribing. It lets me know these sessions are actually making a difference. We'll catch up again soon. Take care till then.